Okay, everybody, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to tonight's American Avalanche Association seminar. Today, we will be discussing effective avalanche communication with the public and the media, leveraging expertise and factual information. We've got some really great guests tonight, and I am very much looking forward to hearing from them. First, though, we've got a couple of things that I'd like to take care of. My name is Dan Caveney. I'm the executive director of the American Avalanche Association. And one of the things that helps us bring you these talks is the generosity of our sponsor organizations. So I always like to begin these presentations by saying a word of thanks to our sponsor organizations. So we have many sponsors. A few of them come up to major sponsorship level. And these are the people that we like to mention here during these seminars. So our thanks go out to CIL Explosives, who's been a longtime sponsor of the American Avalanche Association, Backcountry Access, PEEPS, Veasan Avalanche Control, MND Safety, Arc'teryx, Flylow, and Onyx Maps. These people have really made a commitment to the avalanche community. They're part of the family here. So I always like to encourage you to talk them up and, patronize their businesses when you can, because they give it back to us. Tonight, I do want to make an announcement on behalf of Onyx Maps. You've been seeing them as a sponsor for a while. They've long been in sort of the spatial navigation business, and they are rolling out a backcountry app here right now. It's available live on the iOS and the web, and not quite yet on Android. They're excited about this. Good ease of use with a snow mode that they've got in there. Really great GPS coverage and good satellite imagery. I'm impressed with their satellite imagery and a lot of customization with waypoints, planning tools, and so on and so forth. So keep an eye out on your email from me. They've got some interesting promotions lined up for us, and I'll be announcing those things shortly. Moving on, as we all know, it's been a rough week for avalanche accidents here in the U.S. And I wanted to invite Simon Troutman, who's the National Avalanche Specialist for the U.S. Forest Service, to say a few words about that situation. Simon?
Hey, Dan, thanks. And hi, everybody. Hope you're having a good night. Thanks for having me. Let me share my screen here. Get through here. There we go. All right, Dan, you seeing that?
Yep, we got you, man.
All right, I'm coming through loud and clear. Cool. All right, so like Dan said, and as most of you probably know, the past week, 10 days has been pretty tough in the US in terms of recreational avalanche fatalities and accidents. And in fact, in the past week, we've experienced more recreational avalanche fatalities than during any other period in the last 100 years. And so, quite frankly, we're in the middle of a bad avalanche season, and these deaths, they're geographically diverse. Many communities across the country are dealing with tragedy, and we thought it'd be worth just kind of acknowledging that right now and talking through this avalanche or accident cluster a little bit. Please bear with me. I didn't put a ton of time into this, and the more I looked at it today, the more time I wish I had, because there's some interesting things. But we'll do a quick flyby, and then if people have questions, we can hit those. So of note, we're early February right now, and we're already approaching our national annual average for avalanche fatalities. So it's, like I said, it's potentially shaping up to be a bad avalanche year. Um, in the United States, about 70% of fatal avalanche accidents occur within 4 days of a prior accident. And we call these, you might have even heard in the news this week, people throw this term cluster around. And what we're really talking about here when we call these clusters, we're talking about temporal clusters instead of spatial clusters. But basically what happens is these clusters result in long accident-free periods, then a period with several accidents followed by another long accident-free period. And so hopefully right now we're coming out of one of the largest clusters, at least in the CAIC database. It's important to note that these, why do these things occur? They probably occur in tandem with large-scale weather patterns that create dangerous avalanche conditions. And so we're seeing that this year in the US, kind of widespread avalanche danger across space. And one of the things about this clustering effect is that sometimes you find yourself in one, or we all find ourselves in one, and it seems like things are really bad. And it seems like a lot of people are dying really fast. But then it's followed by a period of nothing. And one of the things about this year that's concerning is that we're in the cluster now, but the conditions are such across space in the US that with more storms, like the danger's not going to go away. If it keeps snowing, the danger will stay elevated. So the only way to get out of the bad avalanche here is if people stop getting in accidents. Like the danger, sometimes people stop getting in accidents because the danger goes away. This year, there's a good chance the danger is going to linger. So this is a picture of today's map in the US, avalanche danger, or the highest avalanche danger for each one of these polygons. And you can see it's a good representation of what I'm talking about, or of these synoptic patterns. You've got considerable danger from the clear up in Northwest Washington all the way down to central or southern Colorado. Yesterday's map was actually much better. I wish I would have took a snapshot of it. And I wish I had a snapshot of about 5 days ago too, because everything was at high. But the point's still the same. Instead of like a big variety in the danger across space, we've kind of got a really similar condition in many places, which is a really nasty weak layer with some snow on top of it and some intermittent storms keeping the danger elevated. Another way to look at it, or describe what we're dealing with this year, and this is, forgive me, this is a super quick flyby, but these are the avalanche warning platform entries by season for the last 4 seasons. And, for the last couple seasons, we've had anywhere from like 115 to down to around 50 entries per season. And this year, we're already at 95 entries. We're only halfway through. So unless things completely shut off, we're looking at having a season, at least right now, on track to, probably exceed or far exceed the last 3 in terms of avalanche warnings. Here's a quick look at the cluster itself. So starting right at the end of January, moving to yesterday, the day before yesterday, and several things kind of stand out from these numbers. 16 people killed in 10 days, 9 fatal accidents in 7 states. Out of these accidents, these 9 accidents, 27 people were caught. And of those 27 people, as I said a minute ago, 16 were killed. And I'm not sure how many were injured. That's something I wish I would have time to figure out, but there were several injuries in these events. One really interesting thing for me is that the median age of the people that have been killed is 46. That's even though one of the largest accidents down in Utah, everybody was in their 20s. And so a lot of the folks that are getting killed this year, getting caught this year, seem to be older. Eric Peitsch did some really interesting work a year or two ago looking at this particular question. And when I get done blabbing here, maybe Eric can talk a little bit more about what this graph means. But in short, through time, it appears that the age of people getting killed in avalanches is increasing. And it's interesting that, at least so far this year, that median age, I'm kind of interested to see what Eric has to say about this at the end here, but that median age of 46 seems really high. So the other thing I'd like to say is that as this stuff goes on and the media frenzy ramps up and we're all living in this COVID world, I think everybody's fairly, concerned or interested in whether or not there's a secondary link between an accident cluster like this in the past week and the individual and societal effects that the pandemic is having. And, the short answer, I have no idea what effect it's having, but I suspect it's having some effect. And the reality is there are more people in the backcountry than ever this year, and in part that's because of COVID. And as we can surmise, more people in the mountains increases the probability of human triggered avalanches. So, and like I said a minute ago, it's kind of impossible to draw a direct line between the stressors of the pandemic, avalanche incidents, but I think the virus, it clearly adds overt and latent stressors to our lives. And these stressors, they influence our day-to-day interactions, and they likely impact our recreational mindset. So I think hopefully everybody on this call can kind of take that to heart and, spread the word. I think that the way that we can get out of this is if, like I said earlier, I don't think the conditions are going to mute themselves. And so the trick is to, get our friends and ourselves to mute the human side of this and see if we can squeak through this year without another one of these clusters. So thanks to the work you guys all do. Stay safe. I want to thank all the avalanche centers and the educators and everybody else that's out there, SAR people that are working on these accidents. It's hard work and we appreciate it.
Thank you, Simon. It was a great talk. Appreciate it. I think I would like to try and, rather than begin a discussion, as much as we'd like to hear Eric's thought on that graph, I think we probably ought to get going on the program tonight. So with that, and Simon, if you could stop sharing your screen, that'd be a help. So with that, I think I'd like to bring Sean Zimmerman-Wall up here. Sean, you can turn on your screen there. Sean is the governance chair on the A3 Board of Directors, and he will be introducing our speakers tonight and moderating the discussion. Sean?
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Can you hear me loud and clear?
We got you.
All right, everybody out there. And thank you, Simon, for taking the time on short notice to come in and add those thoughts and your perspective, as your role with the NAC and the Forest Service is extremely important. And thank you to all the participants out there in virtual reality for coming on in to the A3 webinar series that we've been doing since the beginning of the season. This is our 4th installment. And we've got a really great lineup of folks to speak tonight. And we look forward also to engaging the audience after each speaker for some Q&A. As Eric put in the chat a little bit ago, there is actually a Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. That's where we want to take the questions. It's just a lot easier to answer them and then mark them as answered. I'll be having my esteemed colleagues in the background kind of moving those questions over to me as the panelists wrap up each of their respective presentations. Other than that, you all will be able to see Tom Nichols, who's going to be our first presenter, followed by Amy David. So a bit about them. Tom Nichols is joining us from across the country. He has a esteemed career in a number of different fields. He's working in everything from politics to foreign policy, national security. He's had a professorship at Harvard Extension School and been an aide to the US Senate. Most recently, whether he knew he was getting himself into it or not, he wrote himself a book based on an article that he put together. The Death of Expertise is his latest book, which was born out of an article he wrote for the Federalist. And this is about the campaign against established knowledge and why it matters. And as Dan introduced us earlier to the overall topic here about effective avalanche communication with the public and media and how we are going to leverage expertise and factual information, we thought Tom would be a great presenter here. I commend Dan for getting him to come here. And I'm going to hand it over to Tom here. And then once Tom's complete, we'll be introducing Miss Amy David, and she'll be joining us from the Sawtooth Avalanche Center. So Tom, I'll hand it on over.
Thanks. And thanks for having me. I obviously am not an expert in the subject that you folks all work in, but I'll try and talk a bit tonight in the next 20 minutes about why is it that people don't listen to experts? Why is it that the public it's so difficult to get through to the public about expert knowledge? First thing I should say, my day job is also at the Naval War College, so I don't represent the US Navy or the Defense Department or the government. This is an important topic because people, I think, increasingly have moved away from a traditional distrust of experts, which kind of is, in a democracy, kind of a normal thing about not trusting pointy heads and professors and scientists. But going to a kind of a different problem, which is that they now believe they know more than those experts. And that's what's really made people resistant to taking advice and to listening to people in expert fields, whether it's, what I do with nuclear weapons or whether it's what you do with avalanches. It's not it's not that people don't trust experts, it's that they actually think they know more than experts. And I actually wrote this first article and then turned it into a book. My career has primarily been, at least for about the first 20, 25 years, I was an expert on Russia. I speak Russian, I've been there many times. I've written books on Russia. And this all kind of came to a head for me about 7 or 8 years ago when a young person didn't like something I was saying about Russia and said, "Tom, I don't think you understand Russia. Let me explain this to you." And in talking with people across many fields, I found that we were all having that same problem. And it's not just in hyper specialized fields like avalanches or Russia. It's even people who have expert knowledge in things like trades that people decide to explain to electricians how to wire a house. You've probably seen, I laugh every time I see it now, you've probably seen that Geico ad about how to not turn into your parents, where the plumber is under the sink and the guy says, "Oh, good choice on that wrench." And the coach says, no, you're not helping him. You hired him. That's become an epidemic, I would argue, in not just American life. I'm going to brag about the book for a minute and say, I really thought I was just writing about America. And since the book came out 3 years ago, it's now in 13 languages, which I did not expect. I mean, it's nice in one way, but it's terrifying in another, because I didn't think this problem of not listening to experts, I didn't think that was a problem in Korea or Japan or Indonesia or, Ukraine and all the other places that the book's been published. So I sometimes begin a discussion like this by talking about what constitutes expertise. And I think to an audience of experts, I'll let that go. I think lay people often think that when we call ourselves experts, they think that particularly people in my field are simply pointing to our credentials and say, well, I have a doctorate or I have a certificate or a diploma. I think in your field, it's easier to say, no, I have real experience in this. I've done the work. But increasingly, I think people don't respect any of those bases for expertise. They really look at what other people do and they say, well, how hard can that be? How hard can it be to fly an airplane? How hard can it be to talk about foreign policy. How hard can it be to be an electrician? And I think underlying all of this and the problem that we are all wrestling with is an epidemic, not of a bat virus or COVID, but an epidemic of narcissism that's been going on for about 40 years, where people increasingly believe they are competent at everything. They don't like to be told they're wrong. They take it very personally to be corrected or instructed or educated. They simply don't like it. But before I get into how that happened, I'll simply say that, there are other reasons that people don't trust experts. Experts do make mistakes. There have been expert failures. It's also a very noisy time where so many sources of information over the past 25 years that I think people sometimes become overwhelmed, and it becomes too terrifying to try to figure out who to trust. And so they say, well, I won't trust anybody. I'll simply rely on myself. I hear this every time I give presentations like this, or when I'm giving lectures, or even talking to students. They say, well, I'm smart enough to figure out this. But I had a student the other day say, well, I know which media sources to trust. I kind of take care of that. And I can sort through my own sources. And they become very offended when I will say to them, you really can't. You're really not qualified to do that. It's not, you're not equipped for it. But I think to admit that is very disempowering for the average person, and it makes them feel helpless. And I think that's been something that's been going on for a long time. And when you couple that to expert failures that I would argue get disproportionate amounts of media coverage, we don't talk about when a plane crashes, we immediately say, well, planes are unsafe, even though rationally we know that planes are the absolutely safest way to travel on Earth. But people say, well, it just goes to show you, pilots don't really know what they're doing. I actually had someone say to me years ago, when doctors came out and said, maybe eggs aren't so bad for you. Maybe in all the things we know, we kind of screwed that one up. And I had someone in an audience stand up and say, well, I think this proves that, doctors didn't know anything about heart disease all along. They don't really understand this. That is where all of this overload of information coincides with this kind of narcissism and fear out there. Let me give you a couple of examples of what you're up against before I go on, because I'm going to talk about three specific causes of this. I'm going to talk about the media, the internet, education, but just to give you some sense of exactly the kind of false sense of competence you're up against. Let me show you something here. This map you're looking at is every one of those little blue dots that you see. This was in the New York Times a few years ago. Every single one of those blue dots is the guess of an American adult about where North Korea is. Now, think about that for a moment. That only about 32%, including college graduates, only about 32% of the people who are asked to do this, to identify a country about which we all have very strong opinions and potentially represents a nuclear threat to us, to our troops, to our allies. You have people who think that North Korea is in the middle of the Indian Ocean. It's in Siberia, it's in Mongolia, it's in Australia. But that does not stop people from having very strong opinions about it. In a similar vein, some years ago, a polling company rather puckishly asked people what their feeling was about bombing Agrabah. They were trying to show that Democrats tend to be a little more pacifist, Republicans tend to be a little more warlike. And sure enough, Republicans were mostly in favor of bombing Agrabah. Democrats felt very strongly that we ought to stay out of Agrabah and not bomb them and leave them alone. This is Agrabah, the fictional country in Aladdin. There is no such place as Agrabah. And what we really found was that about half of Americans had a very strong opinion about bombing a cartoon. So how did we get here? How did this happen? Well, let me just get out of that. There are a lot of reasons for this explosion of narcissism over the past 40 years, but I would point to three things that have made created a particular problem for people who deal with expertise and deal with specialized fields of knowledge, excuse me, when we're trying to talk to the public. And again, this could be anybody from doctors to plumbers. I mean, going on the road and talking about this, I just accumulated story after story after story of people who would come forward and say, I'm a neurosurgeon, I'm a house contractor, I'm a stonemason, I'm a teacher. And it was remarkable how similar the stories were. So the first thing I'll say is that part of the problem here is the way we do higher education. Now, this is uncomfortable for me to say because I've been a college professor for 35 years. But I should add, this is not sour grapes. I've had a very successful teaching career. I've enjoyed it. But I've noticed over the course of my career that we have moved increasingly to what I think of as a therapeutic model of education. We don't really try to figure out what students know, particularly at the college level. We ask them quite a lot about how they feel. We ask them if they're happy. We ask them if they feel fulfilled and if included and if they're enjoying the course. I was a department chairman for some years, and I was always struck having to read literally hundreds of evaluations of my colleagues that we were asking people to evaluate things that they could not possibly have the competence to evaluate. And that, I think, has created a resistance to turning people into lifelong learners, because it brings students into the classroom with the assumption that they are already peers, that they are already in some way, somehow co-equal to the people teaching them. And it is, I think it's not accidental, let's put it this way, that the first journal that reached out and asked me for an excerpt from the book was the Chronicle of Higher Education, because this just resonated with so many professors and teachers that, the students who say, well, I understand you're the teacher, but, I have an opinion too. And we have, I think, taken the classroom environment and elevated that environment, elevated students in it to say, all opinions are equal, all opinions are equally valid. There is no such thing as a wrong answer or a bad question or a wrong answer. And I think that has led to multiple generations of students who, and especially because of things like grade inflation, which I don't know how to stop. I talk about it in the book. I don't know. I'm part of the problem. I don't know what to do about it. But students who have gotten through higher education saying, I was pretty smart when I got there, and I've only gotten smarter since. And that concerns me, because I think college ought to be an uncomfortable experience. I went to Boston University. I'm from Massachusetts originally, and I went to Boston University and had a great time. But I think college classrooms, I had a lot of uncomfortable moments. Do I really understand this? Do I really believe in this thing? Do I really grasp this? Does this is my worldview being challenged? And I think we're sometimes letting go of that for the sake of, are you comfortable? Are you happy? Do you feel engaged? Another problem, of course, is the role of the media. And it's fashionable now to just bash journalists. And I actually work with a lot of journalists, and I do a lot of writing. I write regularly for USA Today. I'm a contributing writer at The Atlantic. I think most journalists, I am not a journalist. I am an opinion writer. So, but I work with a lot of journalists, and I think they do a pretty good job. I think the problem is that there is too much bandwidth, and that it means that people can now they can effectively silo themselves into information cul-de-sacs where they never encounter something that they don't want to hear. And this is across the political spectrum. This is not just a problem of Fox, although Fox, I think, is a special case. Tonight, for example, I mean, I usually graze all of the, I'm a political scientist. I graze all of the news networks, find out what people are watching. All the networks were covering the impeachment trial. Fox, it was as if it wasn't happening. And if you want to silo yourself that way, you can do that now. I always tell students, find one reputable magazine, and by reputable, I mean one that has an editor that has a corrections column, that will admit mistakes, that has a masthead that is in the same place every week. Find a magazine that annoys you and subscribe to it. When I worked in the Senate, I worked for a moderate Republican senator from Pennsylvania named John Hines. I was probably the only Republican staffer that had a subscription to Mother Jones, because I just thought it was important that I read it. I already knew what they thought in National Review. I didn't need to read that one. I read Mother Jones and the New Republic to find out what other people were thinking. But with this much bandwidth, you can basically go to the buffet and just eat the only thing you want to eat, and you can eat it all day long. The other problem is that this huge amount of bandwidth breaks down the notion of what constitutes an expert, because they have to fill the time. And so all of a sudden, because you're just trying to put faces on television, you've got, Seb Gorka as an expert. You've got some guy who thinks that the Malaysian airliner was hijacked by aliens as an expert. You have some, 22-year-old fresh out of college who's written one news story who's put on television as an expert. That need to constantly fill the time becomes poisonous. Now, I don't think it was a better world when the news was just 28 minutes of three old white guys reading curated news from New York, but it did impose editorial standards. It meant that with that 28 minutes, and by the way, if you're of a certain age, you may remember before the Vietnam War, the evening news was 15 minutes long. You had to make editorial decisions about what was going to be in that 28 minutes. And people at home watching had to make a commitment to actually watch the news. They couldn't treat it like video wallpaper. I find it maddening when I ask people, well, do you watch the news? And they say, oh, yeah, I watch the news all the time. What they really mean is, I walked through an airport when CNN was on, so technically I watched the news. Very few people read a newspaper. If you ask people, especially people that are kind of prone to conspiracy theory kind of stuff, where they get their information, if you start probing them, what you'll find is they will end up backing up to saying, well, I read things. I read stuff. And what they really mean is I surf the internet until I find something that agrees with the thing I already think. So they're never forced to really deal with a consistent narrative or a consistent fact that appears across networks, or that is agreed upon by all the sources they're looking at. And it's really destructive. The media could do better, I suppose, but as S.E. Cupp, she's a commentator on CNN, she said, people don't realize how much power they have. We are putting this out because that's what the public wants to see. And it's true. The public wants, and I'm part of this problem. I've been on all these shows. The public wants to see gladiatorial matches. They don't really want to see, straight news. They want to tune in for 4 hours and they want to see people fight. And that's what the networks give them, because it's affirming. And again, it's that problem of narcissism. It's affirming because it makes us feel like we're on a team. It makes us feel like we're part of a tribe. It makes us feel like we're right in the things we already believe anyway. It's really unhealthy. I once was jokingly asked, and I'll move now to talking about the internet, which I always leave for last because everybody thinks the internet's a problem. And I think the internet has just put all this on steroids. For people who get their news from the internet and spend all day watching YouTube, I was once asked what I would do about this. And I said, I think the world was a better place when people had to pay by the hour for internet access. Just like with, if you had to buy all of your news services on cable a la carte, I imagine people would make different decisions about what they're watching, just as I think on the internet, they would make different decisions about how much time they would spend, glassy-eyed staring at memes on Facebook. But the internet is a problem. And it's a problem because it lacks gatekeepers. And I know that's a bad word, especially for younger people. Gatekeepers are the people who don't let you read things and who tell you that your piece wasn't good enough, or they are the editors who spike your story. But the flip side of this is that too many young people, I think, in particular, believe that the internet is a library. I get this from students all the time. The internet's a big library, Professor. And I said, no, the internet is a giant dumpster. It's full of a lot of things. Most of them aren't good for you. Now, at the risk of sounding like I'm dumping on young people, I actually think younger people have far better media literacy and internet literacy than their grandparents do. The most, I would say, the biggest problem in America are retired people over 55 who are doing nothing but spending all of their free time sitting in front of Facebook and sending around memes. But I think there is a problem that younger folks and anyone who uses media, they're losing any sense of what constitutes authoritative knowledge. And you will run into that as experts. So, you know, here's a map of how avalanches start. And someone will say, well, you know, I read something once, meaning something flashed before their eyes, and they took it as just as authoritative as anything any of you with a lifetime of work in this may have said. I get this all the time in my own field. Well, Professor, I know you speak Russian and you've been there and you've lived there and you've done all these things, but, you know, I read this thing once. And that was, I think, again, starting a teaching career before the internet, now to where I am, I have watched that process happen in real time, where authoritative sources of information have been completely displaced in the minds of people simply because they appear at will. The other problem that the internet, I think, provides, and there are a lot of problems the internet creates, but it creates the illusion of knowledge. Nothing makes my heart sink as an expert more than someone says, well, you know, I've done my research. You hear this with QAnon people all the time, by the way. You hear this with internet cults where people say, well, you know, I've done my research. No, research is a skill. I've tried to explain this to people to say research is something you actually have to be taught how to do research. Research is not just staring at things that come up in front of you. And again, a very narcissistic culture says, you can't tell me that I'm not smart enough to do my own research. You know, my answer is always that line from A League of Their Own. If it were easy, everyone would do it. I think that sense that it's all just there for the taking, if I just stare at it long enough, really undermines the message of expertise, and it really causes problems to try to get across to people things that they really need to know. And not just about the kind of threats that you deal with, like avalanches. I mean, this is like weather people saying, you need to evacuate your homes. This is a Category 5 hurricane. You need to evacuate. And they say, yeah, well, but, you know, I saw another thing that said I'd probably be okay. And I saw some things about how to do my windows. We're going through it with vaccines. We're going through it with face masks. Basically, we are a culture that doesn't want to be told anything that inconveniences us. And we now have an entire source, an entire resource that just tells us stuff that we want to hear all day long. And in the past, we didn't. In the past, you know, when I was a kid taking the polio vaccine, I mean, there just wasn't a place where parents were going to go and there was going to be some crazy person standing there saying, well, you know, if I were you, I wouldn't take that polio vaccine. But now, through the magic of the internet and unlimited bandwidth and the synergy with the media, and again, an educational system that says we are all equally intelligent and equally capable of learning things, I think we are in really deep trouble. I will close. I wish I could be more optimistic, but I can't. I used to say, when people would ask me what brings all this to an end, and I would say a disaster. If there's a war or a depression or a pandemic, and I used to bring up a pandemic. I said, well, a pandemic, an economic depression, a military conflict, that's when people tend to gravitate back toward, you know, we're having a war with Korea. You know, maybe we need people who speak Korean. You know, in the middle of this depression, maybe we want some economists. I was overly optimistic. The pandemic has actually aggravated this problem where the people who already believe in science continue to believe in it. The people who don't have doubled down and tripled down, backed by an entire American political party that really has this, just kind of hates science in general. And I'm not quite sure what to do about that. So I wish I could be more enthusiastic or optimistic, but I will say that you as experts, my advice to you is don't back down, plant the flag. If someone says, well, that's not what I think about, we are all trained for years to say, I understand your point. Let's unpack this together. I have found that that does not work. I think it's more effective to say, look, this is what I do. It's a life or death issue. I know this better than almost anyone you're ever going to meet. You're going to have to trust me on this. And if you don't want to trust me about it, I don't have to tell you this. And we can just stop this conversation. But either you're going to accept this or you're not. Because I have found that trying to negotiate about expertise simply does not work. It does not cut through that kind of narcissistic armor plating that most people have. And insofar as I think I've ever had any success with this, it's by planting a stake in the ground and saying, I know what I know. Trust me that I'm good at what I do, and you can take it or leave it. And I think most people at that point will say, okay, maybe I shouldn't argue about this. I'm not saying that's a comfortable place to be, and I'm not saying it's easy, but we're in a different world now. So I'll stop there. Happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much, Tom. I appreciate the intro there and then the added bits of information. We do have the Q&A section down here below as folks are able to. And we already have one or two trickling in. We also have some from the panelists as we've had some opportunity to kind of do our own little bit of research on your book and some other things. We do have one question from Mr. Michael Ather. Is wondering, is it possible to even develop consensus with this view?
I don't think the object should be to develop consensus. There are things that are true and there are things that are false. And this is not scientific truth in particular is not a matter for negotiation. But I think even on areas that are more arguable, consensus should be a matter of respect for boundaries. I've been asked, do I ever think I'm wrong? And I said, I've been wrong. Actually, in the book, I talk about the biggest mistakes I've ever made in my academic work or in my career. But the people who generally figure out that experts are wrong are other experts who have dedicated themselves to following the same rules of evidence. As I point out to people about doctors with the eggs business, how did we know that eggs were safe? Well, other doctors finally figured it out. It wasn't people saying, you doctors don't know what you're talking about. I just like eggs and I'm going to eat a lot of them. And it turned out to be okay. That's like walking in and saying, well, I'm an expert on math because I put my mortgage on red in a casino and it came up. So when it comes to consent, I guess I will say, as counterintuitive as it is to say this, I just think consensus is overrated. And I think part of how we got into this is constantly trying to coddle people in the name of consensus when what they're really doing is sort of engaging in attention-seeking behavior. Take an extreme, and I'd be happy to move to the next question, but take an extreme example of the people who say, well, I think the earth is flat. Now, the way we've all been trained to argue with this is to say, well, let me explain to you, satellites and orbital. My answer is, you probably know somewhere in your heart that the earth is not flat. What you really want me to do is argue with you for 3 hours as a means of exchanging emotional energy. So I think the first thing we have to do in those moments is to determine the difference between good faith and bad faith questions about this. And at some point, when people say, well, why should I listen to you? The answer is because I have spent my life studying avalanches and I just know this stuff. And unless you've done the same thing, one of us is going to have to be the authoritative source of information here. A doctor once said to me, patients no longer walk in and say, look, I have questions, which is exactly the right way to go. I always tell people when they want to engage with experts, ask questions. We love answering your questions. But this doctor said, people don't walk in and ask me questions anymore. They walk in and say, here's what I have, and here's what you're going to do. And if you want to argue about it, let's argue about it. But this is what I want. That is not consensus. And I don't blame doctors who say, that is not a conversation I'm going to have. I mean, as one of them said, as soon as you tell me where you went to medical school and where you did your residency, I'll have that conversation. Until then, trust me that I know, the difference between a tibia and a femur. And I just think we have to do that more often because we have gotten lost in this search for consensus.
Yeah, well put. And thank you for the question, Michael. We have another question that's just come in. I think as your thoughts started to form here from Bertram, he asks, how could experts establish their expertise in a written form of communication? He references what we use as an avalanche bulletin to get people to read and process our guidance.
That's a serious problem because people are not readers anymore, but also because people simply dismiss the top line of I am the author of this piece. These are my qualifications, because a lot of folks have been taught to parrot the word credentialism. Oh, you're just flashing your credentials at me. It's amazing how many people hate credentialism until they're looking at a place to send their kids to college, and then suddenly they are fascinated and deeply engaged by credentialism. Credentialism is another way of saying, as people do now, you're not the boss of me. And so I think all you can do is to say, this is my newsletter. This is our newsletter. This is our letterhead. This is who we are. This is how long we've been in business. These are the professional associations that we work with. And people are either going to accept that or they're not. This is, again, like with weather. People who won't evacuate their houses aren't really saying, my weather guy, I don't think he really understands meteorology and he didn't go to the right college and he doesn't have a graduate degree. What they're really saying is, look, I don't want to move. I don't want to evacuate. And so I'm choosing to believe something else. And I'm not sure what you do about that other than to let, and I hate to say this because in a week where you guys have had a very bad week, but I think in some cases, people just have to touch the hot stove. The people who say, well, I don't believe the weathermen about evacuating. Well, when you're up to your hips in water and you should have evacuated, it may change your mind about expertise. But I don't know that. I think part of the problem is that there are so many ways that we can safeguard ourselves against bad things happening, that we convince ourselves that not listening to experts somehow worked out for us. To go back to my casino example, it's like a casino that always gives you back half of your bad bet. And it's kind of like, well, see, I'm a really good gambler. Well, you're really not. It's just that there's kind of people looking out for you. And the people who really get it, I'm a recreational gambler, by the way. The people who really get it about how bad they are at gambling are the people who go home at the end of the night broke. And they say, maybe I shouldn't do that again. But I wish I had a better answer for you than that.
No, I think you bring up a lot of good points there about the challenges of it. And you did mention weather there, and it's the second time you've mentioned it. We're going to come back to that for one of our attendees here, Ben, in just a moment. But first, we're going to answer a question live. Scott Savage, the director of the Sawtooth Avalanche Center, has his hand up. Scott, are you able to ask a question live?
Yeah, I am. Thanks a lot, Sean.
Yep.
Hi, Tom. Hey, thanks. That was a really great, thought-provoking talk. And I'm really impressed with the 2 amazing slides, and that's it. Just nailing the rest of it with no props. So my question's regarding, it'll tie into a couple of things you talked about, kind of expertise and the internet maybe being the bane of our existence. But so at the Sawtooth Avalanche Center, we have a team with a fair amount of expertise that's issuing these public safety products, risk messaging. And then in an immediate adjacent area, we have some, I can't remember the term you used, but kind of, wannabe experts who are issuing, kind of mimicking our products on just Facebook though. And it's, they're obviously not experts. So I'm curious your take on that. Are we best served to just kind of let them do their thing and hope they just kind of burn out and flame away? Or what's your take on that?
Well, you can't stop them because we live in a free society with a First Amendment. I think what you're really up against here, again, I will argue that most people somewhere in their hearts know the difference. But we have become a culture that thinks I don't want to is a real reason for things. I know I should wear a mask. I don't want to. Therefore, that's a reason. I know I shouldn't go snowmobiling. you know, but I want to, and I don't want to listen to you. So that's a reason. I mean, it really is this. I just finished another book on democracy, and I said, you know, we have become a kind of gaggle of toddlers. We are no longer a nation of adults. We have become like children. You know, why am I wearing? Every time I go someplace and I see somebody wearing a mask under their nose, you know what they're saying. Say, I know I'm supposed to wear a mask, but I don't want to, and I don't like it, so I'm putting it under my nose because you're not the boss of me. So I'm not sure what you do about that. I think I don't think it helps you to engage your imitators. I don't think going after them, that just raises their visibility. I'm a big fan of silent contempt on a lot of things. So if someone's trying to, unless there's like a copyright issue, you know, or somebody's spoofing you guys, going out there and saying, hey, those guys are stupid, they're not us. You're the pros. Let your silence speak for you. Put out the product. Don't acknowledge them, because what they want, this is just like a social media strategy. They want to punch up. And if you punch down, you're giving them visibility. And I think that's always a mistake. And I am part of the problem on the internet. I have 500,000 Twitter followers. So I try to use that power wisely, but sometimes I'm, part of the issue. I don't think the internet's a bad thing at all. I think it's like saying, I don't think fast food is bad. I love fast food, but I don't think you should eat it all day. And so I think that's the problem, is that this, well, I know I'm 75 pounds overweight, and it's McDonald's fault for existing. No, it's your fault for eating French fries for breakfast. Again, most people know better. So my advice to you as a professional organization is, don't take them on. That's what they want. They want you to take them on, because then they look like your peers. Was that an answer to your question? Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah, that definitely was. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Tom. Kind of moving through, we're getting some great questions coming in here. This one also comes to us from a forecaster's point of view. And it's a bit lengthy because it's kind of two parts. And you mentioned weather earlier, and we're kind of coming back to that. Simon talked about snowpack and weather, and the fact that both of these things are unpredictable, and there's a lot to be unknown. Weather is wildly difficult to predict, and you talked about that in reference to like hurricane warnings and trying to get people out of their homes. But oftentimes, the weather is going to do what the weather does, and the way that we think as avalanche forecasters or professionals, how it's going to impact this spatially variable snowpack is also somewhat uncertain. So the more that we learn and experience, the more that we understand how many unknowns we're dealing with. And so Ben asks, this puts us in a situation where we understand and appreciate the uncertainty that we have as experts, but at the same time, we're trying to communicate to our audience with a degree of certainty. And his main question is, does this sound like something that is somewhat unique to us in our field, or something that plagues many experts?
No, this plagues all experts, because every field of expertise, except for the hardest of hard sciences, we're all dealing with probabilistic realities. I mean, whether it's you trying to think about, the chances of an avalanche, or me talking about the probability of, war breaking out in Ukraine or something. And so, well, I think, given what I know, this looks like a thing that is likely. And then it doesn't happen. And people say, well, see, you're an idiot. It didn't happen. I think, again, well, there's two problems. First, there is the basic problem of people saying, I will always take the low probability so that I can go do something I want. It's, again, if you've ever been in a casino, the guy who's, I don't know how many of you play blackjack, you're facing a 6, the guy's looking at a 14, the whole table is trying to send mental waves saying, don't hit, don't hit, don't hit. And he says, yeah, but I just feel it. I know the numbers say it's wrong, but I feel it. And what I feel is important. The other problem is that people are just illiterate about math. They are innumerate. So when you say there's a 70% chance this could happen, a lot of people just go, I don't know what that means. So I think one thing you can do is to say, look, we can't give you, because the public wants yes or no answers. Will there be war in Syria this year? Yes or no? Will there be an avalanche? Yes or no? And what you say is, I can't give you a definite yes or no. Here's the way I will pitch it to you. If you knew that every 3 times you left the house, one of those times you could die, would you do it? My dad, God rest his soul, about 15 years ago, he needed a bypass. And he was old and he said, well, is this something I really want to do? And the doctor said, well, there's basically a 7 in 10 chance that you'll die in the next year. And now my dad, which is where I got my gambling gene, he was a poker player, he said, okay, I understand what 7 in 10 means. That on every 10 days, 7 of those might be a day I die. And I think you may have to get it to that point to talk to the public to say, you want to go snowmobiling? Every 4 times you go snowmobiling, one of those times you could die. Is it really worth it to you? I'm not saying it'll happen. I'm not saying, maybe the other 2 days you'll get away with it. But, is that how you want to live? Instead of saying, well, given what we know about, because I think if you try to do this too formally, people get turned off and they just stop. Their attention span, the attention span of the average person is at the level of a fruit fly now. So, you have to personalize it and say, this is what it looks like. This is what I mean. And I think reasoning with the public that way actually is more useful. But in the end, they may say, yeah, I hear you. I know what you're saying, but I really want to go skiing today.
Right. And that's particularly challenging, Tom, in our field, because at the end of the day, we're producing something so that people can go out and recreate safely and have fun. And that's really what they're out there to do. And they check the resources that are available to them, or they look at the signs that a ski area posts, and they're really there to have fun. And some of the other stuff starts to kind of go out into that field.
The first time when I went through a golfaholic phase years ago, and I just loved playing golf. And the first time they set off the thunderstorm warning, I was like, I didn't want to stop playing. I remember, even I'm an intelligent man, but I turned to my buddies. I said, is that a big deal? And one of my friends said, well, you're standing in the middle of an open field waving a metal stick. How confident do you feel about that today? And I said, okay, let's get off the, instead of saying, well, thunderstorm could be a thing and they do it as an insurance, just a friend of mine just got right into my level there, right into my zone. And he said, you're standing in an open field waving a metal stick. How confident are you feeling about that right now? And that's when I said, okay, yeah, I don't need to have a long, okay, let's go. So maybe that's sometimes a more useful way to do it.
Yeah, and there's numerous strategies that we employ to do that. We're coming down to the next couple questions here. We have one from Matt, and his question is, do you see any implications of the use of social media by actual experts? Because at first glance, it seems it's a great opportunity to reach people where they are, but it also mixes and legitimizes the channel as a source of information and encourages non-experts to then add the commentary.
Oh, sure. I mean, part of the reason I am as combative and as present on social media as I am is that I think public intellectuals and experts, we have a duty to be out there where the public is. I think we get nowhere if we just talk to each other. But I will also say, if you don't have the stomach for it, you don't go there. I do, and I have no problem with saying to people when they say, well, I think you're wrong about, Russia. I actually have done this to people. Say, well, I don't think. I say, well, let's continue the conversation in Russian. And if you can't, maybe I'll just talk and you not. And people don't like it, but for the thousands of other people watching, that actually will get across. So remember that when you're on social media, the troll or the pain in the ass that you're talking to, that person is not nearly as important as the thousands of people in the balcony, in the gallery that may be watching. So I think social media can be a very useful venue, but you can't just wade into it and say, oh, by the way, here I am, I'm an avalanche expert. Let me tell you a few things. You have to develop a certain relationship with the medium itself. And that is not for everybody, I will grant you. But I think every professional association, every group of experts should have some kind of social media presence and plant that flag and stake out that territory. Absolutely.
Well, that's a very good point. And actually, we couldn't have planted this any better. This is the great segue over to our next um, participant, which is Amy David, who is that social media coordinator, and maybe can add some depth to this conversation a little bit as we continue to kind of shift your greater information into our context. And so, Tom, I really want to thank you for being here today. Again, folks, Tom's book, The Death of Expertise, put it on your nightstand. It's a great one to read. It's quite insightful, and it helps you make sense of the world that we're currently living in. Tom, thank you very much. And thank you, everybody,
you.
for the great questions. Have a great evening. Well, thanks, everybody, for the great questions across the virtual reality sphere here. Thank you. We are going to move on to Miss Amy David. Amy and I met years ago here in the Wasatch. I can't remember exactly how long ago it was, but she has now relocated to another mountain range up north in the Sawtooths. And she is a woman of many talents. She's spent quite a bit of time being not only a professional skier and athlete, she's now moving into avalanche education. She's riding snowmobiles, and she runs her own media firm called Action Inspired Productions. And currently, she's also doing some great work with the Sawtooth Avalanche Center. We heard from Scott Savage just a bit ago, as well as Ben, her co-workers. And she's also doing some work in wilderness guiding with Sawtooth Mountain Guides, and doing some retreat directorship for an organization called And She's Dope Too. She's also a bit of a researcher and looks forward to continuing to work in this realm of snow and avalanches. And her job at the Sawtooth Avalanche Center is to help get the word out and to manage their social media accounts to get that word out. So Amy, if you're able to kind of switch on your camera and join us, we'd love for you to speak to our audience tonight.
Great, thanks for the introduction, Sean. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Okay, awesome. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to us tonight. I'm gonna do a quick screen share here. So bear with me. I'm not quite as swift as Tom was with that change there. Okay. I've been on the other side of these Zoom presentations hosting with the Sawtooth Avalanche Center, but here I am on the other end of things, and it's a little trickier than I thought it was. So props to everyone who's been doing this.
Looks like it's coming up now for us. We've got avalanches and social media.
Okay, awesome. Great. So yeah, thank you so much again for having me. I'm going to do a presentation on avalanches and social media, and trying to target leveraging the expert voices and maximizing community connection to inspire action. And in just a minute, I'll come back to elaborate exactly how we can do that. But just to get started here, how and why am I following Tom Nichols? That's an excellent question. That was a very impressive talk, and I am definitely going to take home a few of those points that I got notes on from Tom. And this presentation is going to take a slightly different angle and gear towards avalanche educators and forecasters, and how we can try to target the culture around backcountry travel and safe backcountry travel, and doing that through social media. So bear with me, it's a little tricky when I'm not getting to see all of your faces here in person rather than looking here at the screen. But that's all right, we all fall off our snowmobiles sometimes, or at least I do. So I'm here tonight talking because I think that one of the overarching themes that we can focus on with increasing the buy-in of people to take avalanche education and to read the forecast does come from a sense of inclusivity and the way that we build community and how we convey those messages. My role with the Sawtooth Avalanche Center is specifically with the Friends Group, which is the nonprofit that helps fund the Forest Service side of the Sawtooth Avalanche Center. So I've been able to work with the forecasters where they are producing the public safety specific messages. And then my role is to help them where needed, and then to produce content that is for the education events and for fundraising activities. And so my main theme with that is how to build this human connection with the public and with other media outlets. I think that human connection is one of the biggest things that makes this really important. To be sensitive to the accidents that have happened in the last week, and knowing that myself losing a loved one in the past, it's that deep human connection which makes this so important to keep each other alive and safe and come home to our families at the end of the day. And so whatever we can do to make that importance of safety elevated while still getting out there and having fun and making it an enjoyable experience, that's one of the big take homes that I hope people can take away from this presentation. So moving on here, I remember as a tiny kid sitting in a snow pit with my mom as she was collecting snow science data for a research project she was working on. And ever since then, I've had this curiosity for snow. And that has moved on to when I was a middle schooler and science fair competitor. My sister and I got very, very into the science fair, thanks to my mom, who's an environmental science teacher and just an incredible mentor for teaching kids to be curious about the outdoors and about science. And I hope that we can all be able to pass on that sense of curiosity to the public as they're learning to look at the snow and the terrain and make smart decisions. And one of the biggest takeaways that I have looking back at that time in the science fair when we got really competitive with it is that we had to learn how to communicate really complex systems where you become an expert in that area. And you have to be able to communicate your message to someone who has no idea about that particular topic. And so that's something I can bring back to communicating about avalanches is, as experts, a forecaster has such a great depth of knowledge about the snow. And we want to, not that I'm a forecaster, but those of you who are forecasters or experts in your area, being able to then explain an important message to someone who's going to take that information and make a really important decision on how they travel in avalanche terrain. So how do you make it simple? And today, with so much information and the internet, everybody has a device in their hands. It's kind of like information overload out there. And how do you not get diluted when you're pouring more information into the bucket? How does it not just dissipate with everything else out there? We want our information and messages to rise to the top. So one silver lining to this is that every single person has the device in their hand and we can reach them. And one of those great ways to do that is through social media. Especially today, humans crave connection with other people, being able to express themselves if we're not able to be together as much in a social setting. And so utilizing that to our advantage. Now, as I've got started down a few rabbit holes already, or I prefer the ermine. So to not go down too many ermine holes with this topic, I'm going to try and keep it concise here. So top of the line when doing crisis communication, and avalanches fall under that category, use the acronym KISS, which I know many avalanche educators likely use that. Keep it simple, stupid. So crisis communication, we want to keep it simple: consistency, credibility, and simplicity, and then insert expert voice. So today, I'm going to even dive to a slightly deeper level with how we can bring in a greater community here and go beyond the crisis communication concepts, which I'm sure many of you are already versed in as the avalanche educators that you are, or guides. So today I want to focus on connection, community, and action. First, I'll start with a quick story. Many of you probably know of or have heard of Margaret Wheeler. I am definitely not an expert in certain areas and have learned the value of seeking out mentors. And I sought Margaret out when I realized she lived in the same mountain range as me. And I'm an aspiring AMGA ski guide, and Margaret is an educator for that. And so we've linked up, and I've really absorbed a lot of her knowledge. And one of the main things that she was teaching me, and this is very separate from social media, but is a theme that's going to trickle down, is what tone are you using? I asked her one day, how do I, as a young female who is potentially guiding a group of other skiers who are probably competent as well, or maybe they're not, but they might have a stereotype or a stigma towards me as a young female. And I asked her, how can I combat that? How do I assert authority? And she said, the most important thing for you to do is to build trust. Instead of having an aggressive way of asserting your authority and trying to make people want to listen and follow you, it's about building that trust and the tone that you use. So I like to think of, when we're in school and the principal tells us not to do certain things, or you go to the principal for being bad, or at least I did. And then, the next day I'm doing the same thing again. But then the cool kid, the older kid that I thought was really good at, say, a sport that I cared about, and I respected that person, if they told me, do this or don't do that, I often would listen more than that authoritative figure. And so that's concept of building trust is something that avalanche centers or guide services can focus on with their messaging through social media as well. So knowing when to use the crisis communication, the credibility, concise and simple, but also when you're trying to bring in people to take more avalanche education courses or join in on fundraising events, building that trust and a relationship and a conversation with your community, I think will have a longer lasting effect and be more genuine in the long run. So to use the Avalanche Center as a kind of case study for bringing these points home, and hopefully some of you can use these as well, before you start going in your social media strategy, the first step is to define your mission and define your goals. So as an example, the mission of the Friends of the Sawtooth Avalanche Center and my efforts for social media with them is a multi-platform initiative to build a connection between the brand and consumer, which will ultimately inspire the community to take action. So what actions are desired with these? How do we want to inspire people? We want them to, for the Friends, either donate money, take an educational course, attend events, utilize the avalanche forecast, and utilize the website. And for the media, this is initiated through a combination of telling stories, because humans desire that connection and the emotional connection is long lasting, highlighting key points of the forecast, informing communities of fundraising and educational opportunities, introducing the people involved with the organization so that you're developing that relationship, and highlighting educational and community events. So what goals do we have, or what goals did I identify with this mission to develop that human connection between the community and the Friends of the Avalanche Center through multimedia storytelling and key messages? Like Tom explained before, we have the shortest attention spans, and it seems like they're only getting shorter. So quick videos and highlighting the key messaging at the top of any caption that you're using. So goals here: 1, identify the key messaging; 2, increase fundraising donations; 3, increase traffic, so more social media followers, views, website use, and audience growth. And that is not necessarily because we want a bigger following. We just want more people accessing these tools and using the products and getting that important messaging. So if you don't have a ton of followers, that doesn't really matter. It's about how many people are really listening and utilizing that product. And then increase engagement. So we want the action and the on the feet, real life situation happening here as a byproduct. So people attending events, participation in education courses, and submitting observations, which I'll get into a little bit more farther down the line here. I'm going to breeze through this slide because it just gives an overview of a full communication plan is not just social media. You know, there's strategy involved, there's content creation, there's public relations. So actually working with people in various media outlets to expand your message beyond just your own reach. But today I just want to focus on social media. So as we all know, so many people have social media. So you have a wide range of people and an audience, and it's across a lot of different platforms. So I would advise folks to figure out what the different benefits of each platform are. For example, Facebook, we use that for promoting events because it has a really great flow and way that you can promote all the details of the events, really streamlined and easy, where Instagram, not so much. But then on Instagram, it's a different age range of people even. And the stories are really great. For those of you who use Instagram, you've probably noticed you can find yourself stuck in the stories where you open them up and then, 20 minutes later, you're like, I don't even know this person. Why am I looking at their social media? And for an avalanche center, it's important, or it's wise to put our message out there because we have a captive audience already. So if they're going to be looking at something, they might as well be looking at a message about snow safety. One of the ways that I have found has been quite effective with social media in conveying these messages is being aware of the different learning styles. As I've already said multiple times, I know that many of you are educators or guides, and so you are probably aware that people learn in different ways. So visual, auditory, reading and writing, those people that really want all of the details, they're going to read the full forecast. And then they're going to Google some stuff probably. Kinesthetic, those people learn better in the field when they're actually out there doing it, putting it to work. And so when we build our social media posts, we try and take into consideration all of those learning styles. And so this is a great example that the forecasters at the Sawtooth Abbey Center have been doing with videos. And I've got pretty rough internet connection out here. So I'm not going to play a video as an example, but I'm sure many of you have seen these because many different avalanche centers are using this tactic also. So in this video, Chris is explaining the snowpack. And so there's auditory, and then reading and writing, we have a great caption here with lots of details. He directs people to the website to learn more. And then visual, if I know a lot about avalanches, what Chris is saying, he's giving me a lot of information that I can still gather some important details from. But if I also, it's my first time looking at a snowpack, I'm like, I don't know anything about layers or facets or hand hardness. Just visually looking at this and the way he's physically touching the snow, showing that it's really loose underneath, and then you pull that heavy slab out on top. It soaks in for all different types of people, all different levels of knowledge. So videos are really great. And I didn't ask Ben if I could read this. So Ben, I hope you're okay with this, but I really wanted to read this testimonial that Ben Vanden Bosch, one of our forecasters, emailed me when I asked him what he thought about social media. And I think that others could relate to this of differentiating your personal interest in social media with the professional ability to really utilize it for good. So Ben says, in an interesting revelation I've come to this season in general, I'm pretty averse to social media. In the past year, it's been easy for me to see the negative side of things. Yet this year, I've tried to set aside my personal feelings about social media and embrace it to use as the forecast center, part of that mindset shift has been acknowledging that it's a quite powerful tool. In just a few minutes, we can make these videos that show exactly what we're seeing and talk directly to our audience. In the past, I've gotten hung up on everything needing to be perfect and professional, but I think what is most important is getting the message out to people and realizing that we have this powerful tool to use and not let it use us. And it's helped him embrace these different tools that he may not have used in a personal situation, but professionally, it's quite a valuable tool. So thanks for letting me read that, Ben. Going back to the crisis communication, here's just a quick example of ways that we've used that credibility of the experts. So the forecasters are giving this specific information out, and then keeping it simple. And so this first page here is just a phone screenshot. It's right in your face, red alert, danger, and then the bottom line. So the bottom line normally would be hopefully the bare minimum that people would read, but on social media, people are going through so fast. My biggest hope is that they at least come away with my effort to underline these keywords. Dangerous, avalanches, almost certain. So if they come away with that, that's getting at least the most important message across. So we try to include those along with other ways to bring in the community for the friend side. And I'm going to shift gears now to how can we bring in the connection of the community? So how is your message shared and who is receiving it? This is really important when it comes to inclusivity and representation of different types of demographics and different people. When, at first you would think, well, we just need to communicate the avalanche hazard with all people, like we're not being exclusive. But when it comes to people wanting to show up to educational or fundraising events, it really does make a difference. So here's a photo of us at the ARI instructor training course. This is the motorized group. And one of the big goals here is to also take photos of snowmobilers out in the terrain, still having a good time and learning about avalanche safety. Because the different user groups need to be represented, from snowmobilers to split boarders to snowshoers, as well as people just working around town. If you live in a place where avalanche paths run down into, oh, there's my phone ringing. Sorry about that. Yeah, so moving on with representation here, I'll just let y'all look at that if you're interested. It came from a person's Instagram that I thought was pretty clever on representing different types of people. And on another note, importance to not stereotype people, but when you're speaking to people on social media, you want to think of who you're listening to. Like I would probably address my grandpa different than I would address, my college buddy when I'm going to have a chat with them. So just being aware of, the old time skier who's been skiing longer than I have, or the person that's new to snowmobiling, or the person that is snowshoeing who's also a scientist. There's all different types of people, and then gender as well. So representing them in your photos will help with that connection, so people feel like they're welcome. They're invited to the party also. Here, I'm going to tie back Margaret in a podcast that I listened to of her on the Avalanche Hour. She quoted this phrase that is a corporate phrase, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And that really resonated with me on many different fronts. But when we're looking at social media specifically, no matter how many strategies we have in place for communicating avalanche safety and how people operate when they go into the backcountry, did you do your transceiver check at the trailhead? And then what? No matter how good our strategy is, if that culture does not help execute the strategy, then it all goes out the window. And so this is something that I'm really hoping we can work together on. And I'd love to have extended conversations with those of you interested about this. but how can we address the culture on social media, and then on social media does translate to real life. So the challenges that we have here: inclusion and representation, which I already addressed, the send it culture, and comparisonitis. For me, this sets in pretty intense on a personal level, in the sense that I'm trying to send it on my skis or my snowmobile, and I definitely get FOMO, and I'm sure many of you get that as well, when I see my friends in Jackson getting overhead POW, or I see them skiing, someone skiing a steep couloir line really fast, but it's not safe avalanche conditions where I live. So trying to differentiate and critically think about how we communicate the risk that we're taking out in the mountains, and how social media and that comparisonitis can really set in. So how can we overcome these challenges? Including all user groups and demographics in the visual content, and then go beyond that to extend that inclusion and an invitation to all different types of group in community outreach. So in the real life stuff that we're doing, and having an open narrative about increasing the safety margins, and show behind the scenes of planning and turning around and conservative terrain choices. So hopefully I didn't blur the lines too much. Some of these are goals that I would hope for the overall backcountry community, not just coming from the Avalanche Center. So if you have, say, pro skiers who are always showing themselves skiing really steep, sick lines, encouraging those types of people who have an influence to change some of the dialogue and open the curtain to behind the scenes of what they're doing for safety mitigation. All right, so videos of experts, the cool kids. And this part is an example of what we did with the Sawtooth Avalanche Center. The cool kids sort of thing is you have different cliques within your community. And this doesn't mean the different cool kids have big social media followings, but they're in different groups, riding groups. And if we as experts can reach out to them and bring them in and say, can you share this message? Make them feel included. And then it's a domino effect where then their inner circle will see that message. If they look up to that person, hopefully that will have a trickle down effect. And this isn't saying that those people are now the experts, but they are embracing the messaging that we're trying to get across and sharing that with their in-group. And not just doing the one cool kids group, but all of the different types. I know Scott Savage does a really good job of calling different people within our community and seeing what they've been seeing in the mountains, and just building that relationship with the Avalanche Center and different riding groups. So then I know I'm going a little long on time here, so I'll try and wrap it up here with a couple examples. And these are encourage observations and a rescue challenge. And I'm sure many people have done these or do this within their organization. But I want to look at these with the sense or the lens of experiential learning theory. So what is experiential learning? Experiential learning means learning from an experience or learning by doing. Experiential education immerses learners in an experience and then encourages reflection about the experience to develop new skills, new attitudes, or new ways of thinking. So Kolb's cycle of experiential learning, this is something that I learned in college when we were doing outdoor education and leadership, and it really stuck with me for how I personally learn. And when we're outdoors, all of the senses are firing, and we're doing the activity. And if you can bring in that full cycle of a debrief, I think a lot of great learning outcomes can happen that way. So concrete experience, reflective observation, the abstract conceptualization, and active experimentation, bringing it back to the next experience. So what does that have to do with encouraging people to submit observations for your Avalanche Center? Well, so what I'm looking at here is the general public, and on our social media from the Avalanche Center, we're encouraging people to submit an observation. What are you seeing in the mountains? That can be an ECT test, or that can be, was the snow crusty or was it fluffy, depending on the person's knowledge level. We're trying to have it be inclusive so they can submit whatever they're seeing. And yes, that does increase the overall big picture and understanding of what's happening in the forecast zone. But on a different level, it's forming a deeper understanding for that individual and for the public. It's helping encourage them to be those scientists, be the detectives. And I know, not saying that they're the experts, but encouraging that curiosity. So they're forming the cognitive connections. And it's self-motivated when they go out to think critically and looking for those clues that then will hopefully match the forecast, or maybe they don't match the forecast. And even if these people don't end up submitting observations, they're likely thinking about it. If they're taking a few photos and thinking about it as they're traveling through the mountains, if they go home and submit them, great. If they don't, at least they're going to that deeper level of thinking. And we encourage them to do that through social media and then tagging at Sawtooth Abbey. So then we can choose, do we, share this or not, to build that bigger picture for the community. And on the same lines of changing the culture to help implement our strategy more effectively is something that we're about to launch for the Sawtooth Avalanche Center here with the Friends group, is a rescue practice challenge. And what this looks like is encouraging our followers to post a photo or a video of them and their backcountry partners practicing avalanche companion rescue, tagging Sawtooth Abbey and the Friends during the month of February for the chance to win a jacket and some swag. So what this does is it encourages the backcountry users to practice companion rescue, and hopefully will have a domino effect through each sub-community, like I mentioned before, of each person who participates. So yes, it's on social media, that's great, but the ultimate goal is that other people will see that and the culture will shift from just skiing the rad lines and showing that kind of stuff to also showing this culture of safety and knowledge around avalanche education and companion rescue also. And that does not mean to not go and ski rowdy lines when it's safe, but if we can embrace and build that dialogue and narrative within the community online, I think it will really translate to what we're seeing in the mountains. So to bring it back to just a few of the Ermine holes I decided to go down today, themes for the crisis communication. So, I switched those. So crisis communication, the bottom line, we want to have consistency, maintain credibility, and keep it simple. And then going down to summarize on that deeper level is building that human connection with people, developing a relationship with the community and embracing all demographics within our community, and then inspiring them to take action, if that's education, being a leader within their backcountry group, whatever that action may be. And I did want to read a quick quote from a group that does some really great social research on avalanche risk decision-making, the White Heat Project. If you haven't read some of their research, I highly recommend it. And this is what this one sentence really dials in the point that I hope that I'll be able to make today. And they say, when we see social media posts or direct communication signal that we value knowledge and wise decisions, we affect the social norms that determine the direction of positional behavior. And so with this effort, I hope that through social media focused on avalanches, we can leverage our collective expert voices and maximize the community connection to inspire action. And I think I will leave it at that and open it up if we have any questions. It's tricky with a short amount of time. I'd love to keep talking about a few of these topics longer, but thank you so much for giving me the time and listening. And I would encourage anyone to email me with that email at the bottom, media@sawtoothavalanche.com if you'd like to talk any more about this stuff.
Thank you very much, Amy. And we can now begin to start to take some questions from the audience. We also have some from our panel that we can do. Amy, is it okay if we stop sharing your screen so we can go to full view?
Yeah, definitely.
Great, excellent. Thank you very much for that presentation and those helpful tips. It's good to see an Avalanche Center actually employ somebody to do this. I think that's become a trend over the years as we realize the power of this tool. And from what I've seen following the different Avalanche Centers and the things that they're doing, this is starting to become a very powerful way to get messaging across. When we're talking about how your Avalanche Center messages, or maybe just what you've talked to other centers doing, how do experts kind of stride the line between being, they want to be that assertive expert, but at the same time, they want to avoid being like condescending on social media or maybe even in forecast discussions? Is there something that you've seen that's worked particularly well, or that you've tried and failed and come back with a better option?
Yeah, that's a great question. One thing that we've done or tried to maintain is a clear line between public safety information, and that's coming directly from the forecasters. And then information about events and education can come from myself as the representative of the Friends group. And one thing I've noticed that the forecasters do really well when they're trying to communicate certain information where you need to, draw a line, is keep it factual and maintain that factual expert voice throughout. And that's a great question, because I haven't seen our side of things come across as condescending. But I think when it's critical information, to keep it simple and factual and linked to that deeper forecast. And luckily for us with avalanches, there's, it's scientific. And so it's not really an opinion base. So you can try to remove that self opinion and perhaps a condescending voice, if it might be coming across, is try and remove that and focus on the facts. And then with the education and fundraising side of things, I tend to focus on trying to be encouraging and inclusive. That's one thing in my separate from Avalanche communication is I've done a lot of work with women's groups, and I meant to say this at the beginning where I was face planning on the snowmobile, but got a little flustered and forgot to mention it. But it kind of comes across in what I focused on with my women's backpack guiding retreats, and that was on trying to create a culture and a community of non-judgment, and where it's okay to not know the answers, and there's an expert here that's going to help you learn that. And so as the person who's teaching, to not make those other people who might not know the answer feel bad about themselves. Like, it's okay that you don't know, but I'm here to tell you what I do know. So that kind of concept of non-judgment could be helpful if things are coming across with a condescending tone ever.
Nice. Those are good examples from your past there, and I think that you're employing those now. Another question that came from our panel was, what's the best way to capture the audience that you don't have the attention of, but that you know that you need or that you should have?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question that we've been working on. And I am definitely open to hearing other people's insight if you've found something that works. One thing that we tried to do this year as an example was used under the umbrella of a fundraising mission. And so I tried to find different people in the community that had an influence and reach out to them and ask them to be like ambassadors of the Friends of the Avi Center and share our certain messaging around that. fundraiser, and what that looked like was a grassroots video testimonial of what they do when they go out into the backcountry, how they utilize the Avalanche Center, and yeah, why they value it. And so by seeing that person talking, I think whoever follows that person and respects their opinion, if they see that person talking, giving us honest, genuine testimonial, hopefully they will then follow suit with what that person was suggesting. So that's definitely one way to branch out beyond your current followers or people you already have a reach with.
Excellent. Yeah, and I would be interested to see that conversation start to evolve more as we look to reach those user groups. I think, one of the big ones over the years has been, how do we reach more of the snowmobiling community? How do we reach more of the snowshoeing community? Maybe folks that are equally in the mountains in sheer number, or are growing and are more than just the skiers and the snowboarders. That's great advice. Another question that kind of comes up is, how do you measure, the efficacy of your messaging when it comes to like the social media aspect specifically, since that's what you handle, with followership and folks that are actually listening?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been using just the analytics. So on Instagram, you can set it to a business account, and in your insights, you can see, if you have a growth in followers, and like a growth in followers, great. So they saw and liked your photos and decided to follow you. But what really matters, like you said, is are they actually listening to what you have to say? And I noticed in the last month we did have a few avalanche warnings, and I was able to track actual website clicks and post shares and post saves. And it doesn't really give you the full story of, is your message actually hitting home for that person? Are they changing their behavior from that message? But it does give you a hint that they value what you had to say and they want to save it for later, or they're actually going to the website looking for more information. And so seeing the high numbers that we had after those avalanche warnings gave me hope that people are really interested in seeing what the Avalanche Center has to say.
Excellent. And that whole idea about the message lands in every hand is a pretty big one. You can get that out there
Yeah.
on those high hazard days.
Definitely.
We have a question from the audience here from Matthew Click. He's asking about, on social media, how much do you feel the need to maybe unpack or make more precise the potential ambiguity that exists in terms like considerable, moderate? Does social media allow for that like extra explanation, or is that more something that happens on the forecasting side, or is it a mixed effort?
That's a great question. I think that would be a question I would forward to Scott Savage, but to answer it to a certain degree, what I think has been helpful is using Zoom. And so with the Sawtooth Avalanche Center, we do the Digging Deeper series, where that's where you would unpack a more complicated topic like that. So the Digging Deeper series they've done for a few years, where the forecasters do a presentation for an hour every other Wednesday throughout the season. And that's where you can ask those in-depth questions to the people who really know those answers. Where social media can get tricky because you can only share so much, and it's hard to see if that person really gets the context. But I think those in-person presentations, like what we're doing tonight, where the audience can ask deeper questions, and there's room to make sure that full circle of communication was met. Like, did they actually understand what I was trying to say?
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Amy. We appreciate hearing your perspective on this and learning from your expertise in it. It was a nice companion to the elements that Tom was able to bring kind of from outside of our industry. And so we've had a lot of great success with these webinars, being able to kind of have folks from in and from without, or maybe on the fringes. And that is bringing us towards the end of our time here. We've had some great questions from our panels and the audience. for both speakers. And we just want to thank everybody out there for engaging and coming to these seminars over the last bit. And we look to continue these on. There'll be another one coming up shortly in March. We'll be working on the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the avalanche industry. And I think that some of the elements, Amy, that you were just talking about are going to be rolled into that quite nicely as well. And so we always appreciate having folks from the community that are active, engaged, and getting excited about carrying the torch here, like yourself, as well as hearing from outside experts like Tom. And we look forward to how the rest of these are going to continue to go. So thanks again, Amy.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
And thank you to all of you out there in virtual reality. We enjoyed putting this on for you tonight. As we kind of conclude here, again, we will have another seminar coming up in March, and be looking in your inboxes for that, as you did for the login for tonight's piece. We appreciate our members here at the American Avalanche Association. On behalf of the Board of Trustees, I just want to thank all of you for coming out. Spread the word about these kinds of seminars. Tune your friends into the recordings when they make it to the avalanchereview.org, which is now our online version of the print edition. And also continue to engage and be a part of the Avalanche community in whatever capacity you feel like you can be, or what you aspire to be. And as you've all seen too in the membership, we are currently on the cusp of hiring a new executive director. And so if there is somebody that you know in your circles that you would like to talk to about the position, or they want more information, they can contact us. They can find the job posting on our website, and we'll be able to welcome another great individual into the tenure that Dan has taken a hold of over the last 3 years. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dan if you have any closing comments. Thank you again.
No, I don't. Thanks, Sean. And thanks, Amy and Tom, who's had to go. I think it was a great session. And yeah, good job, everybody. Thanks for coming. And you know, to Sean's comment about getting a new executive director, I love this organization, and the job has been great. But you know, there comes a time to move on. I think it's better for the organization and for me. So please do talk it up. And if anybody's got questions or comments or concerns, I encourage you to contact me at dan@avalanche.org. Happy to talk to you. So that's all I had to say. So with that, good night, I guess. Thanks for showing up. It was a great seminar.